You could take one of the, we got 300. You take a Book of Common Prayer, especially one with the tape on the edge, because nobody's going to be like, why are you giving away our best ones? You take a Book of Common Prayer. Okay, good evening, people who are watching us online right now or who are watching us online later. If you have not started with Compline, you could. You can pause the video right now, go read you some prayers. That's what we all did, and now we begin. As ever, if you desire, I would send you a copy of this. This year, Susan Nixon hadn't even gotten to me yet, looking for one. So I'm like ready. I got the PDFs to send to people. And they exist for you all to look at so that if I don't get to everything, you can at least see what I had hoped to say. Mostly, I get most of where I intended to be. And before we dive into this next section on the Sermon on the Mount, we started with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the, if we were doing Luke, it would be blessed are the these people, woe to these people. And it'd be a much harder conversation. We'd have to spend half of the season talking about that. Because, you know, woe is not irrecoverable. If you're reading Luke and it says, woe to Jackie, you got time to fix it. There's breath in you, you got time to turn around. You're reading the pet prodigal son. The young man is far off. He sees his father's house in the distance. He's about to go apologize. His father sees him, runs out to where he is, does not let the youngest son make his offer to be a servant in his house, immediately says, here is my son, let's have a feast, let's cut the calf, get the ring, get the sandals, put the best robe on him. God meets you where you are. Oldest brother, sitting outside the house, grumpalumpagus, throwing a temper tantrum. He's right outside the door. He's like, well, I stayed here. You've never given me and my friends so much as a goat. I've been here the whole time. Father leaves the party, stands outside, immediately outside the house. If you are far off, God can come find you. If you are real close, God can come find you. It is never too late to be found by God. Has nothing to do with the Sermon on the Mount, but man, love talking about it. Here's the two things I need to remind people. Some of you will be hearing this don't stand away from where the camera sees. This would be a very boring video for you. Two things I want to remind you all before we start talking about the 6 specific behaviors that Jesus is going to reframe for his audience in this lesson, because I'm going chronologically, but I have divided the lessons up by concept. So we are moving left to right, top to bottom, from the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount to the end. And you would only know that if you're looking at my notes and seeing the chapter numbers and the verse numbers. You will not know that from how I am talking about it. This is the section where he starts saying, like, you have heard it said, but I say to you. I have 2 things I need you to remember before I get into that, and one annotation about my colleagues. Every single time this section of the Sermon on the Mount comes up in the lectionary, you can get on YouTube the next day and see half of the preachers in America, not just the Episcopal Church, say, I think that if the Sermon on the Mount were written today, it might say, you have heard it said, and then they would make up something. And then they would say, but I say unto you, and then they would make up something. And that would be a very interesting thought experiment if we had fixed any of the problems Jesus names in the Sermon on the Mount. If we nailed these, all societies almost everywhere didn't have any of these problems, we could start making up new ones. I think we got to solve the things Jesus said first. Here's my 2 things I want you to remember. And I want you to remember them not just at the Sermon on the Mount, but it is very relevant to this kind of study. The people who taught me.
Is this number 1?
This is number 1.
Okay.
That is an excellent question. The people who taught me, their education was most likely in German.
And what?
In German.
German?
The center of intellectual and theological debate from the middle of the 19th century until about the 1940s was in Germany, whether you were Catholic or Protestant. These schools were developing and writing more, and you would go there to learn things about the Bible and things about history, and you might take a trip to the Vatican catacombs and look up books that don't exist anywhere else. And so if you were taking classes in America, you would be reading books in German because the Germans were the people who were doing the theology. One of the reasons for that is because there was a lot of money in both Protestant and Catholic German expressions, because this is the place where there's a tremendous amount of tension between the two. And if you are having problems getting people to be Catholic or having problems getting to be Protestant, you can throw a lot of money in that situation. Now you will note, students of history, that during that time period is the rise of a tremendously violent anti-Semitism and the rise of the Nazi political party in Germany. And all of the major churches in Germany, not every clergy person within, but every single church sided with the Nazis at some point. Maybe not by the end of World War II, but definitely before the war, but definitely by the time Czechoslovakia no longer belonged to themselves. So when you are reading theology made in the 20th century, you always have to have in the back of your mind, is this kind of anti-Semitic? Because sometimes, yeah, John of Chrysostom said some things about some Jewish people that I might schedule a coffee date with you if you said to me. But sometimes the gospel didn't say that at all. You just got educated by a group of people for whom it was politically expedient to blame things on the Jews. So we have to subtract that from our thinking and be suspicious of anything that makes the Jews out to be the bad guy. And we especially have to remember that every single person who wrote anything we read in the New Testament, in addition to being Christian, still considered themselves to be Jewish. The second thing, history that makes sense to how we have to understand, is that in the 1970s and 80s, people began to have tools that they'd never had before. And it exploded and changed again with the internet. For the overwhelming majority of human history, if Buck wanted to find 2 different translations of the Bible, he needed to go physically get the copies, open them to the same page, have a 3rd book there with a Greek or Hebrew lexicon, have a 4th book there with an interlinear, which would show you like what other words might have been used. And he'd have to sit there with those 4 books at least, like, okay, well, why did this translation say this? And why did this one say this? And why did this one say this? You and I can do that on our phones right now, Bible Gateway. So the 80s and the 70s in particular, while we had these tools but not the internet, involved people who made assumptions, who made giant leaps in faith. Sometimes they just made out outright lies. And I bet you everyone in this room believes something that has subsequently been demonstrated to be not even remotely true. There is a thing, I'm going to get to it, it'll be one of the things, the examples that I give about turn the other cheek. And you will find someone, I mean, you could find it in the next 90 seconds if you got on your phone, and some of you could, I'm not going to police phone use in this room, who says that Jesus doesn't say, let people slap you. When he says turn the other cheek, it's because if you backhanded someone, it was an insult that put them down. But if you slapped them with the front of your hand because they'd turned their other cheek, that shamed them because you were an equal now. You were calling yourself an equal, and that kind of slap was made you somehow passively resistant to and embarrassing them. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's true. No anthropologist thinks that, no historian of ancient Judaism thinks that, no Roman historian thinks that. It's just a thing a specific guy whose name I don't remember off the top of my head, made up in the late 70s, and now half the people I know believe like, well, if you get slapped in a certain way, Mike, I got you this week's.
Oh, thank you.
There are other things like that, but that one's just not true. It's a neat idea. Jesus didn't tell you to be a doormat. He told you to stand up for yourself in a nonviolent way. That's a great idea. It's just not in the Bible. There are other places Jesus stands up for himself in a nonviolent way. Most of them happen in front of Pontius Pilate. Are you the king of the Jews? You say that I am. Hands in my pockets. Jesus has that. Not there. Questions before I get to my actual notes. I just said a bunch of things that may have offended people. It is terrible to tell people that the things that they have been learning since they were in grade school might be not in the Bible at all. Then after the Beatitudes, Jesus starts making a case about specific laws. And he begins by taking very specific examples and does the well, you've heard this. And he is always referencing something that is in the Torah specifically. Now there's 613 laws in the Old Testament. Not any point in history could you have followed all those laws, because some of them are for the temple, some of them are for the tabernacle, some of them are for the wilderness, some of them don't make sense together. Some of them are very specific. Well, you have to carry this urn from here to this place during this ritual, but then in the very next scene, it's back on a totally different table, and you're like, well, you told me who had to carry it over there. Why are you not telling me who carried it back over to this other table? They're not comprehensive. They are therefore incomprehensible as a set of laws. And the way that Jewish people have always interpreted this incomprehensible set of laws, and the way that the early Christians interpreted the same incomprehensible set of laws, is, we must be meant to wrestle with these specific ideas. Not that none of them need to be followed. Some of them are very important. But we must need to be wrestling with some of these ideas in order to figure out what is revealed about God's character and intention in the context of this law, so that we can apply it to something else. And I'm going to give you a controversial example because I'm really trying to start with a bunch of things that distract you from the whole rest of whatever I'm going to say. But I trust you all to follow along. And if you have more questions about this, write them down. I'll talk to you, but I'll take you out to coffee. There is nothing in the Bible, anywhere, that says anything about abortion. There's nothing about a medical procedure that we would consider abortion. There is a trial of ordeal that has to do with bitter waters, that has to do with whether or not a woman cheated in, I think, Leviticus, that does not in any way describe an abortion. And if you did the things that it says there, you would not have a miscarriage. And so there's no, it's just not there. So you have to take other laws, which is why there are Christians and Jews who are pro-life and pro-choice, because it's just not in the Bible. You have to make a biblical case if you want it to be related to, but you have to take the laws that are there and extrapolate from them what God's intention is for the human person. If somebody told you, like, no, the Bible's very clear. They told, Jeremiah, he was knitted together before God knew him before he was knitted together in his mother's womb. Was that Jeremiah or was that Isaiah? It was Jeremiah.
That he was what?
Knitted, that God knew him before he was knitted together in his mother's womb. That's a terrible argument for being pro-life. I'm not trying to discourage anybody from being pro-life. It's a terrible argument because of the word before. If God knew him before, then this is not a relevant data point in the conversation about the medical procedure that is abortion. I'm not telling you to believe one way or the other. I'm saying the Bible doesn't say anything about it. So our beliefs have to wrestle with Scripture and extrapolate until we know what we believe God wants from us.
Well, that's what I've always heard. God knew us before we were born.
Before doesn't have anything to do with the moment of our conception, or what Catholics call ensoulment.
Or what?
Or what Catholics call ensoulment.
Uh-huh.
But that's just my example of it's not there. So we have to extrapolate. And we're meant to. Jacob is renamed Israel because he's wrestling with God. That is not a metaphor. It can also be a metaphor, but like every prayer you've ever prayed, God, I don't understand this, and I think I might be mad at you. That was a good prayer. Every prayer you've prayed that was like, God, I understand this. Thank you. I am not this other poor SOB. It's probably a bad prayer. My prayers are all like, oh, Lord, I'm trying. I'll try to do better tomorrow. Those are the ones I think the Lord our God desires. Questions before I go through the 6 case studies that Jesus uses? I just said a bunch of complicated things. I may have thrown a wrench in everybody's evening.
And now this is the 6 specific behaviors of Jesus.
These are 6 things he lists in Matthew 5 before we get to the Sermon on the Mount that are, I'm going to call them case studies. They are not a list of all the rules. They're not even a list of all the 10 commandments. They're just, here's some ways in which you, the Pharisees and scribes, and maybe the people listening, have been mistaught the character of God by the implication that the rule is comprehensive as opposed to illustrating God's character. And the first one is murder.
You have it? Thank you. I'm sorry.
No. The first one is murder. Could I get somebody to read Matthew 5, 27 through 30?
21.
21 through 22.
What is this scripture now, the real one?
Matthew 25. No. Matthew 21,
21.
Chapter 5, verses 21 and 22.
Chapter 5.
Verses 21 through 22.
You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother and sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire.
What's y'all's takeaway?
Well, my first takeaway is, and I'm in King James, but it says, angry with a brother or sister without a cause,
Oh, ooh.
which that version did not say that.
I
I don't
wonder,
know which one you got.
New NRSV.
I wonder,
Just pointed that out. There's no, I mean, to me, it makes a big difference, but
yeah. But did James add that in there because they wanted to make sure you could be angry with people, or did we find better manuscripts? And I mean, like, you got to look up some history.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. This is a lot older than that version. And there are no notes with it, so.
And you can tell about people's theology by whether this says you shall not murder or you shall not kill. Because the Hebrew is very specific in the Old Testament. It just says the word kill. And then a bunch of times in the Hebrew Bible, people are told to go out and kill people. It's very confusing. God says, don't do this unless it's to those people. I think that's why we wrestle with it. It's one of the reasons we have to. So what do y'all get out of it? I'm not going to chastise you for giving the wrong answer. This is a sincere question. Y'all don't even have to give an answer I like.
I get that we usually take things very literal, like thou shalt not murder or kill, whichever word you want to use. And what I think Jesus is saying here is that it's not necessarily a physical thing that you do, but it's the way you are treating other people is the same thing. Because generally when you're mad at somebody, if you're really mad, the thought passes in your head, well, I wish I could just clock them or kill them or run them over with my car. Or, but, and
Not that you have any ideas, right?
oh no, I just made those up. Like,
It's never happened during a vestry meeting.
yeah, but I mean, I think we'll see that in a lot of things, not just here, but you'll see it in a lot of areas where Jesus talks about the law and where people have taken it literally, like actually doing something to someone, and he puts it in the terms of how you're treating them. And the feelings that you have as you're doing it are the feelings that are the same, and that makes you guilty. Just my thought.
And it is unclear to me. I'm not riffing on your position.
That's fine.
It is unclear to me as a moderately educated clergy person. I hadn't been doing this as long as some other people, but I've been going to church 5 to 7 times a week for most of my life. Does God expect that we would ever become the kind of person who this aims for us to be? Or does God expect that we aim for it and we will become the best person we could possibly achieve? I don't know. I know that we at least do the second one, because if we took this seriously, this attitude that even rage toward our brother or sister is the same kind of liability as murder. That would change my behavior enough that I would ultimately become someone less likely to murder. We've seen some very devoted Christians act in passionate situations where they are out of control, and then they hurt somebody. So I'm not sure it is foolproof, but my best chance of not murdering someone is to have the attitude and to work on not even being angry. And if I work on that, if I take it seriously, I may not achieve what God has asked, but I sure am less likely to do what the Ten Commandments say not to do if I'm aiming for not even being mad. Shoot for the stars. Or shoot for the moon, you'll land among the stars. That one.
I think of Thomas Merton's prayer just because, I mean, you know, I'll pull it up because I always misquote it, but it's thinking of, nor do I really know myself, the fact that I think I'm following your will doesn't mean that I'm actually doing so, but I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope that I have that desire in all that I'm doing.
James read a prayer from Thomas Merton that you all will know, and I will try to put in the comments later.
But
I'm telling the camera people.
okay, yeah, I mean, commentary, play by play.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it just, I mean, in that, I think the right heart, because I can't stand certain people. I mean, look at me, like, I just had it out with my boss today, just because of the way, like, she and I have two different communication styles. And I thought I was just bucking, you know, running somebody over. I'm thinking to myself, I'm picturing my boss right now. But in that anger, I also was able to have a communication, like after I walked away and got more regulated, was able to walk back into that and be able to stand up for myself, like you were talking about with Jesus, and in a more prayerful way, because I didn't have to walk away and pray for her and myself. But I think that's the call, is like simply to, we don't know ourselves, but at the same time we desire to be more like Jesus in this and to help others be more like Jesus by not being people that want to get run over.
Can I get somebody who is not James to read Matthew 5:27 through 30, which is in fact what I desire to be read? I've made sure.
You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell.
Here's my pitch. And you all need not agree with me, which is something I say fairly often. But for my money, this is one of the prime biblical verses where people are like, oh, that's a metaphor. Obviously, it's a metaphor. Jesus doesn't want people cutting off their hands and plugging out their eyes. There's some other things, even in the Sermon on the Mount, even in this section, that are very definitely meant to be taken literally. But I, because I do not want to pluck out my eye, think that this must be hyperbole. And I caution us against deciding that the things we don't want to do are when Jesus is just kidding. And the things we find it easy to do are the times when it's very literal. I believe he means it. It would be better for me to pluck out my eye than for me to look at a woman who's, say, dressed inappropriately and think like, well, that stirs up some feelings in me biochemically, and that's her fault. Now, she may be dressed inappropriately. We might all as a society be like, you need to put on some pants. But the rules of society notwithstanding, the things that are happening inside of me are not her problem. They are not her fault. So when Jesus is looking at, and I think that you cannot take the first part without the second part because they inform each other. Everything has a context. He says that you're just looking at a woman with lust in your heart and you've already forced her to commit adultery. That by itself is a very different teaching than immediately following it up with, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, cut it out. By itself, that commandment is don't ever look at anybody and find them attractive. And I don't have a lot of control over that. I see people who are attractive and my body goes like, that one, sure glad I am married to her, because dang, she got a booty like pow. That's technical jargon. You're allowed to say that about your wife. That lust or attraction is a very different ask than the one that is followed by, if you have a problem, it's your problem. If it's your eye, cut off your eye. If you can't keep your hands to yourself, cut off your hand. The two side by side mean something different than the first one would alone. And I would like to believe, and I do in fact believe, that Jesus is asking us to live in such a way that you can keep your eye. To see other people in such a way that you can keep your hands. Instead of me cutting out my eye, maybe I look at somebody and I have this thought about how, like, it'd be really nice if we lived in Sweden and there were saunas. I could see a little bit more. If I have that thought, instead of thinking, how dare she show up and interrupt my day with her sashaying in a skin-tight dress? What if my thought was, oh, I am distracted. I got a problem. I'm gonna spend some more time thinking about my wife and my beautiful children. How I see her is the thing I have control over. How she is dressed is not something I have control over.
Okay,
Y'all are welcome to disagree with me.
so I have a question. So in this instance, I'm going to describe, is this adultery?
We're going to have an adultery case study.
Is adultery always sexual? Or can it be something else? Okay, so like, if you like a certain singer, like, I don't like, say back in the 60s, women like, okay, but that was probably sexual, Elvis. Let me think of something else. So, no,
It's my favorite things ever been said in this room.
okay, so say, okay, here's an example. I like Charles Stanley. Okay. And so much to the point, like, right, so like I get his newsletters every month. So like I save them. I mean, it's almost like you're over on this side where it's possessions. But I think it's for a good reason.
Yeah,
I don't know where the cutoff is.
I have two thoughts about attraction to somebody, and one of them is that the Old Testament treats expressions of human sexuality as beautiful and gifts of God. So, like, Christians have from the very beginning, and definitely now, had some nervousness about that. There's some things we like, even we continue to translate in ways that obscure what they really say. My go-to example of this is the Song of Solomon, where there's an awful lot of "my soul longs for you, my soul wants to connect with you, my soul seeks your mouth." Well, the Hebrew word for soul is the exact same Hebrew word for throat. And I'll tell you, if you're reading through the Song of Solomon and replace the word throat every time you read the word soul, you're going to think like, this is not appropriate to be in the Bible, because Christians can't read that in the manner in which it was intended, as a love poem. And love poems sometimes say things you would not get away with saying from the pulpit. So we're like, let's just go with soul. It's fine. People get the gist. They don't need the graphic, specific physical description of what she's saying. But there is a beauty in being attracted to people, inherent in the scripture. And there is a manipulation and an abuse of and a taking advantage of and a hiding of that attraction, where you've turned them into an object, where you've turned them into something less than human, where you've turned them into something that only exists for your gratification, even if it's in your imagination. And that is gross. Being attractive to people is just not presented, particularly in the Old Testament, as a problem. Being attracted to people in such a way that robs them of their humanity and their dignity is. We always grew up, I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room has heard that Bathsheba was bathing on the roof, and that there's a possibility that maybe you bathe on the roof in the eye line of where the king could just look out of his balcony and see you. Maybe you want to be seen bathing. The two problems with that are that bathing on the roof is a very normal thing in this culture. And if you go back and read 2 Samuel, she isn't on the roof. David is. This lady's in her house. They don't have air conditioning. They have open windows because it's hot in the Middle East. And he's on his roof like, it's my impression of King David. It's a very different.
Yeah, I was going to say the camera didn't catch that one.
Oh. That's a very different story, right? There's a dehumanization to her. He's looking at her from the roof and he calls her, and like whatever happened between them and whatever positive it may have been, we don't know. There's a power differential that we in the 21st century have some questions about. Those questions were not asked until the 21st century, but I'll tell you, once you get to her husband being murdered by him, the questions no longer have to exist. David's behavior is clearly bad. He turns her into an object. He robs her of her humanity. Anyone who murders your spouse in order to get with you has robbed you of some of your autonomy and humanity. Unless you're in on it, in which case you're both doing that. Two strangers on a train. Can I get somebody to read Matthew 5:31 through 32? Let's hear it from the King James Version.
What to?
They got fancy words.
It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery.
Now, because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to have us read Deuteronomy 24:1 through 4, which is the section you can go back and look at that talks about issuing a certificate of divorce. And it is remarkably vague. It literally says, you can't issue a certificate of divorce unless it's for a good reason. And then you would think, well, what is a good reason? And instead of the Bible describing that, they just argued about it for 1,000 years. And Jesus says, infidelity is a good reason, but otherwise, you are living, if you have the other position, you are living in a situation where your wife is constantly existing in the threat of you just deciding to throw her out. And some families in our culture will not take a divorced woman back into their household, so you wind up on the street. There's only two things on the street that a woman can do to provide for herself. And one of them is sex work and the other is begging. And if you're just sitting there begging all the time and people know you don't have a home, that is actually more dangerous for women now and in the first century than it is to be a sex worker and have a sort of network of people who are also looking out for you. Neither of them are good situations. Jesus comes and says, you got to have a real good reason, man. Two become one flesh. You can't just throw people out. Women deserve to live in the safety of knowing that if they piss you off one evening by burning the lentil stew, you are not going to decide that was cause for divorce. That is a very different rule in the first century than if you read it in the 21st century and it just says, oh, no divorces. Right? Because the underlying wisdom is let's protect women from the fear they constantly live in. And the people who continue to believe that there should be no divorce, which is not the Episcopal Church, they're not wholly unreasonable, but they do need to wrestle with the reason for this text. There's actually quite a few people in this room who are divorced. Some of y'all wanted that. Some of you did not want it to happen to you. And I'll tell you, everybody's dignity was protected in my case. I was pissed off about it, but everybody's dignity was protected. And therefore, I feel confident that we honored what Jesus is asking the Pharisees and the scribes, or what he's asking an audience who's been told by the Pharisees and the scribes, here's the rules. The rules had a purpose. Because I'm running out of time, I'm just going to burn through swearing and oaths. This one ties into, can I get somebody to read Matthew 5:33 through 37? We're never running so late we can't read the Bible. Bruce, you look ready.
Again, you have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you have pledged to the Lord. But I say to you that you must not pledge at all. You must not pledge by heaven, because it's God's throne. You must not pledge by the earth, because it is God's footstool. You must not pledge by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great King. And you must not pledge by your head, because you can't turn one hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one.
We're talking about a culture where people took their allegiance and took their religious symbols and made, I swear to you on such and such. We do something similar. I swear on my grandmother's grave that such and such. And enough people were either framing these things like, don't swear on the temple. Well, that's a weird thing to swear on. And it's not necessarily as serious as swearing by God. There were people who were using these kinds of oaths to go back and say, like, well, we didn't swear on something as important as you having not paid me back, and therefore you are going to exist in debt bondage, which we swear is not slavery, wink, wink. And also there are no more Jubilee years in Second Temple Judaism, so you will live in debt bondage for as long as I want you to. And the Romans, who don't have debt bondage, they just have slavery, are never going to hear your appeal to get out of debt bondage. So you might be my property forever. Jesus is like, hey, stop playing games. You need to be the kind of person who lives with such integrity that if I tell you I'm going to do something, Marty believes I'm going to do it, or I will have an emergency, or I will try to do it and fail. Not, I'm tricking her, not, I'm going to say I'm doing it but blowing it up. I don't know if y'all have seen Russell Brand's last stand-up special, and he says, every time somebody asks me if I can pick them up from the airport, and I say yes. Never once have I picked somebody up from the airport. I just like being the kind of friend who comes across like he would say yes to that. And a lot of those people never talk to me again, but I like the feeling of being somebody who says yes. Okay, so you're just a liar, right? That's different than failing. That's different than trying and being inadequate. That's different than having an emergency come up or situations changed. You should live such that when you say things to people, they expect, like, he or she's going to try. They may even succeed. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. You're going to live in a world where there are contracts. You're going to live in a world where people swear on the Bibles. There were versions of that in Judean, Roman-occupied Judah. You're never going to get away from it. So the instruction couldn't possibly be never go swear an oath in court. That doesn't make any sense. You can't live in the world like that. They would throw you in jail. But you could live with integrity. And integrity doesn't mean you'll be right. But integrity means that people trust you mean what you say, even if you then flounder. Get somebody to read Matthew 5:38 through 41. We started 7 minutes late. I got 5 minutes left. And anybody who needs to leave, I understand. Matthew 5:38.
You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles.
How many of y'all have heard some version of the thing like slapping the backhand, slapping the front hand? Buck is aware of it. How many of y'all have heard that, people were allowed to ask for your cloak, but you giving them your shirt makes you naked? And in the Old Testament, the person who caused you to be naked, the shame is on them. How many of you have heard that Roman soldiers could compel you to walk a mile carrying their pack, which is embarrassing unless you were a citizen. Nobody's a citizen except Paul, apparently, which doesn't make any sense, but he claims it and nobody questions it. So he's saying, hey, instead of this 1 mile, why don't you walk the extra mile? That's where that phrase comes from. And that would make you more equals. You would overwhelm them with your generosity. Those are all beliefs that did not exist whatsoever until the 1970s. I don't mean to say that they're wrong. Creative, non-violent resistance is great. I love it when people don't hit other people back. But what most Christians throughout most history believed was that Jesus is talking about the wheels of injustice and violence and throwing a stick in the middle of them and screeching those gears and saying, this is actually going to stop with me. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth means Bruce comes and kills my brother. I'm supposed to stop at going back and killing his brother. Because before that, and all the other cultures around, particularly before Alexander came and instilled some more Western thoughts into the laws of these people, Bruce comes and kills my brother, and I'm like, well, I'll just burn down his whole village. Serves him right. Well, the tribes who are related to him are like, Sam burned down Bruce's whole village. I'm going to get rid of his whole ethnic group. There will be no more Sheridans in them there hills. So the Old Testament goes, no. An eye for an eye. Brother for a brother. Then y'all got to stop. Problem is, we're living like that. Not everybody agrees on what's fair or who started it. So maybe Bruce thinks he's redressing a wrong. I'm sorry, you're just the person I pointed to this time. So he believes an eye for an eye. He's coming and getting my brother. Now we're even. But I believe you just got my brother, so I'm going to come back and get yours. Now Bruce thinks we're not even again. Jesus says, it's not working. The violence has to stop somewhere. An eye for an eye is better than an eye for a village. If you have to keep doing that, it is an improvement. But the goal is not to improve a little bit and then stop and congratulate yourself on how you didn't burn a whole village. The goal is to live in a world where nobody's killing anybody's brother in vengeance anyway. Now, Matthew 5:43 through 45. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Jesus quotes the commandment to love your neighbor and then challenges the assumption that it is therefore acceptable to hate people who are not technically your neighbor. Instead, he calls for his followers to love his enemies, love their enemies. And enemies are not the people you dislike. I hate to throw this at the end of the thing before everybody leaves, because this might be the most upsetting thing that I tell y'all. the people who don't vote like you, the pundits on the TV you don't like, the people who cut you off in traffic, none of those would the Bible consider to be your enemies. Those are your neighbors. And some of your neighbors, pardon my language, suck. They're not great people. They're not fun to be around. You are not inviting them to your birthday party. Every single place that the Bible, Old Testament or New, enumerates on someone who may be an enemy, it is in the context of violence. Your enemies are the people who would hurt you. Your enemies are the people who plan to hurt you. Your enemies are the people who don't plan to, but man, if they got the opportunity, they would throw their leg out and let you trip and sprawl on the floor. Your enemies are not the people in the Middle East who hate you. Those are still neighbors. Your enemies are the people who pick up guns and bombs and go and try and kill Christians and Jewish people. Enemies are the violent ones. Enemies are the Buddhists who strap bombs to themselves and go into Muslim temples in the Philippines and blow up those temples. Those people are enemies. You not liking someone is just a normal, neighborly problem that we all have to deal with and live with. But the ask here to love your enemies is so extraordinarily radical that I don't think I have achieved it. I'm not certain that I will. The people who I dislike, I can figure out how to get along with them. The people who dislike me so much that they're never going to try and get along with me, I can figure out how to live away from them. But loving your enemies is Jesus explicitly asking us to take someone who would hurt you and again throw a wrench in those cogs and say, like, man, I'm not going to make the world worse just because you're trying to make the world worse. I'm not going to define my vision of humanity by your inhumanity. I'm not going to take your violence and let you set the bar for human behavior.
It strikes me that all these 6 things we've been talking about, the emotions and actions, murder and adultery and divorce and swearing, and, retaliation and love, and is Jesus telling us a set of rules, or is he telling us, here's how you react to those events and emotions and things? And I don't see him telling us, you know, if this happens, that you got to do. It's how you react to those things that affect you that makes the difference. And he's just saying, you know, make up your mind and do what you think is, I'm not articulate enough to
No,
that, but
no, I think you are.
he's given us a guideline of how to react to the things that heretofore we've just been given a rule book.
How to react.
Now we're given a way to, a playbook, basically now.
I would say how to react and how to try to think about it.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to overnight love your enemies. It's not going to work. But you could take the people who you've been thinking of as your enemies, who you just don't like, which is a totally different thing. And you could start to think about, like, it's not my enemy. It's an SOB I don't want to talk to, but that's not my enemy. I have enemies.
What Jesus asks us to do is change our way of thinking about the things that affect us and how we react to them.
Yeah. That woman over there is not dressed appropriately. She may need to put on a jacket. But the problems going on inside my heart and mind is not her fault. That's a problem with
But
me.
defense attorneys use that in court.
And-
Yeah.
And how you act on that emotion.
Now,
I think
they blamed the woman and how she was dressed.
I think there may be some defense attorneys hadn't spent enough time reading their Bibles. I apologize if any of you are defense attorneys. There is a section here.
Friends of defense attorneys, and I thank God for them. Otherwise, I'd be calling y'all from Redmond.
There is a long paragraph here on religious hypocrisy, which does not fit into the way that I've shaped this 5 weeks. Instead of trying to tell y'all everything, I just skipped, be not like the hypocrites in the synagogues. Y'all hear me preach on that 4 or 5 times a year because we read that 4 or 5 times a year, and we're about to hit Holy Week where we will read it again. So I got a paragraph on page 6. Enjoy it if you want, ignore it if you want. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious God, I thank you for this time, for the ability, for the inclination, for the technology that we all have to spend some portion of our lives orienting ourselves toward you. May the meditations of all our hearts drive us to live more as you would have us to live, and to forgive ourselves more readily when we make missteps. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you.